Welcome to Love Light, the only podcast dedicated to bright, fine art photography. Hosted by Sarah Jane Ethan, Love Light is here to celebrate all things bright, pretty and pastel. At Love Light, white is the new black and beauty is in the detail. This is your place to relax, a place to belong, a place to be inspired and connect with like-minded colleagues who share your passion for light and beauty. So come and introduce yourself in the Love Light Facebook group and subscribe to the Love Light YouTube, podcast and Instagram for your weekly dose of inspiration and connect with bright, fine art photographers from around the world.
Well, hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Love Light podcast. Today we've got a very special treat because we've got Catherine Guidry. Catherine Guidry is a New Orleans-based wedding photographer where she lives in a newly renovated 120-year-old house with her husband Brad. She has photographed close to 400 weddings over a 10-year career. She's been featured in many publications like Southern Bride, Style Me Pretty, The Knot, and she has her own podcast actually called Mistakes Makes Magic to help other photographers and creative entrepreneurs embrace imperfection and pursue their passions, which I absolutely love the idea that imperfection can actually lead to magic, as you describe it. So I'm really excited to hear, how you got started with all of this and how you ultimately ended up as an educator and a podcaster and your passion for embracing imperfection. So welcome, Catherine. So glad to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much. You're so warm and welcoming, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be chatting with you this morning.
Oh, is it? We literally just chatted for a few minutes before we started this episode, and I think we just both went, "Yep, I like you."
I know.
So it's such an honor. We're so grateful for your generosity to come and share your story with us. So tell us a little bit about how you got started. I mean, you've been going for 10 years and you photographed a lot of weddings. So take us right back to the very start. What did that look like?
Yeah. So I actually didn't initially set out to become a photographer. I graduated from high school and I was like, okay, what do I want to do? And I decided to study architecture. That's how I met my husband, Brad, actually. And he does practice architecture, but obviously I do not.
Hence the renovating a house, because
right.
Yeah.
And we still do help each other with each of our own businesses. He second shoots with me and I, will give him critiques of his design work that are, maybe he does or doesn't look forward to those. I don't know.
I was going to say welcomed or unwelcomed, it's coming.
But yeah, while I was in architecture school, I, at some point came into photography and initially was photographing architecture.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was really great. And I did that for a little while, but I realized my passion was really for portraits and specifically weddings.
Right.
I think it just took all the things, the high stress environment and the creativity and the beautiful details, and it wrapped them all up into a big package of love. And so I started shooting weddings in grad school and I realized I loved it way more than architecture. And so when I graduated, finished grad school, I told my parents, I was like, I know you guys are going to be really disappointed with this, but I want to pursue photography full time. And so that was about 2010, I started full time.
Wow, that's amazing. That's such an interesting journey. And I know quite a few architects and engineers who end up doing photography, because you said your husband second shoots for you now, and I think it gives you quite a good eye in photography because you're aware a lot about composition and balance and lines and things. And so how do you feel that photographing architecture actually has helped you now or do you feel like it hasn't? Has it helped you with what you're doing now with your career?
Yeah, no, I definitely see a translation. I think a lot of architectural photography, you'd probably be surprised at how much styling goes into it.
Interesting.
And paying attention to every little detail, like even are the chairs, maybe in real life they look great straight, but in the photo they need to be adjusted. And so that, and then also just understanding different spaces and lighting conditions. Sometimes you need artificial light. Sometimes you can use the natural light with maybe a little bit of fill. And so I think that really has helped me with photographing, especially weddings, because there's so many different things happening, different lighting scenarios you have to style. And so that, and then also I think the biggest help for me, and I'm sure any photographer can relate to this, is the evolution of an image, right? So when you start photographing something like a couple, for instance, and you pose them, but it's not like exactly what you had in mind, but then you tweak it, and then you're like, okay, that's a little bit more what I'm thinking, but then you tweak it, and then you finally get to where you want it to be.
Yeah.
Well, in design school, that's the process that we learn, the design process, the evolving of an idea. And so I don't get discouraged if I don't get something right away. I just realize that it's not going to be right away ever. And then B, that even when you get it to the point that you like it, it's also probably never finished. Like I could even continue to make it better and better and better. And so that's, I think the biggest takeaway for me has been that like evolving of an idea, you know?
I really love that. It made me think of that quote from, was it Thomas Edison who created the light bulb? And he said, I didn't fail 99 times. I found 99 ways how not to make a light bulb. And it just, it all adds, you know, each thing you're like, that's not it. That's not it either. It actually just ends up then leading to the thing that you do, that you are building, you know, and you are creating. I really love that. So you said that you were photographing architecture and then you discovered that you liked portraiture. So like, and weddings. So how did that happen? Because that's quite, you know, a total different genre to be photographing. How did that come about?
It's kind of like a funny revelation, but I saw a wedding gallery on Facebook, and it was a local photographer. Her style is very different than my current style. It was kind of like a dramatic, you know, very like ethereal kind of, I don't know, like take on weddings. And when I saw the gallery, I was like, wow, this is a wedding? Like, this is really interesting and cool and different. I didn't know wedding photography could be so artistic.
Wow.
And I've always been a person who just like, I watch all the love stories, and I love The Bachelor.
You love, as they say.
And I think I have like a mild obsession with love stories and documenting moments. Like I've always been like that. Even as a kid, I was the one who was documenting everyone else.
Yeah.
And so yeah, when I saw that, I just kind of realized like, I don't know, I'm really intrigued by this. And I started photographing friends and family and events happening around me. And I had the opportunity to photograph my first wedding. And I was like, this is so much fun. I can't believe that people actually make money doing this. You know, I couldn't believe it.
I still pinch myself now. I'm like, I literally getting paid to do something I love. Like this is mental.
Yeah, I know. And I say that all the time. It's so crazy to me. And, you know, when you've been doing anything for long enough, it sometimes has its moments, if I'm being completely honest, where it loses some of the spark you had in the beginning. But anytime I think about that, like if I'm mainly it's just at receptions towards the end when you're so tired and everyone's drinking and stuff, I'm like, okay, I need to change my mindset and think back to the beginning, and also just realize that like this is our job. Yeah. What an amazing ability to do this for a living. And so I just kind of come back to a place of gratitude. It feels surreal that this is what we do for a living.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? And I think it's also the creative process. I think it fascinates me, the whole creative process, that you make something and then somebody pays you for it. And I'm like, did you like that? Like I made that out of nothing. And then people pay you for it and then thank you for taking their money. And you're like, oh my goodness, like, I just made that up. Do you like it? And it feels like a real honor and really surreal that people are essentially paying me for how I see the world. And because that's something that just comes naturally to me, to just, well, it's just what I see, you know, and my pictures are always full of a lot of laughter. And that's because I like laughing, you know, and I think life is there to be enjoyed, you know. So I think I'm quite often walking around with the camera just smiling at people going, and then they just start smiling too. And then, so I just think it's my take on life, you know, and people are paying me for that. And that's amazing. Yeah. It's a real honor, isn't it?
It really is. And, you know, I think with photography, people reflect so much of who you are. Like I can see why when you're photographing someone, Sarah Jane, that they are giving you back that energy. Yeah, because you have such a warm, I feel like my cheeks are hurting because I mean, I'm just looking at your face and smiling, and and I'm not like that all the time. So,
Interesting.
you know, I could see you bringing that out in people.
I do. I really do love doing that. Like you said, I wonder whether people laugh more around me or whether they're just naturally laughers. But I don't. I just
Probably more around you.
Yeah, I tell bad jokes and just get them laughing. That's
always a good fail safe.
yeah, that's amazing. So now I'm really sorry because I think I might have missed this part of the story. But what actually? When did you have your first wedding, or when did you actually start photographing people? So you saw this gallery and you just thought, oh, that's incredible. Like, how did you actually then start transitioning into portraiture and event photography?
Yeah, right. Yeah, because you know, when you're starting out, it is so interesting because you know that, like, you know, maybe that you want to shoot weddings, but then you don't have a portfolio. And so people aren't really willing to hire you in the beginning. And that's something I see a lot with my education brand and helping newer photographers. They're ready and they have the knowledge, but they don't have maybe as much practice because they don't have the clientele coming in. Yes. So that's a great question. Well, you know, this was I don't know, I feel like now there's a lot more resources on hand, but I literally printed out portraits of people that I had taken, which were mainly friends. And I don't even know if at the time I knew what a styled shoot was, or that you could go and like create a vision of your own with a bride and show someone like, look, I know this isn't a real client, but look what I can do. Yes. So it was literally portraits of people that I had at the time, and I printed them out. And of course, in the beginning, mainly who you're working with as friends, right? Acquaintances and whatnot. Well, my mom's best friend's daughter, who I grew up with, was getting married. And so she came to the house and I showed her my printed work, and she was very laid back. And she's like, great. Yeah. How much, you know? And so my first wedding, I charged $1,000. And I also photographed her bridal and her engagement session. So altogether, her package was $1,500. And I was,
that's pretty good for a first client. You know, most people do it for free, you know, or just you know, pennies. So it's a pretty healthy price for a first wedding.
Yes. And I did feel a lot of pressure because of that it was a paid client. But I also felt ready as I could be, you know, for never having photographed a wedding before. But that's a lot of why Mistakes Make Magic was born, because, oh my gosh, I made all the mistakes.
Oh no.
Never working for anyone, you know, it's to be expected. Most photographers shadow, or they second shoot, or, you know, they do something instead of just showing up and photographing their first wedding. But I don't know, maybe ignorance was bliss for me, because I asked my best friend to tag along, and the two of us photographed the wedding together. So, you know, it was fine. They were happy. They loved their photos, and I learned a lot of lessons. So that was how I got my first gig.
I love that. And I love that you now share it through your podcast, Mistakes Make Magic. Just this concept, not to be ashamed of mistakes, because they're not mistakes, they're learning. I spoke to one of my friends recently who was really beating herself up about being a single parent and feeling like she wasn't, you know, doing it well enough. And I said, look, you're never failing. You're always learning. You move to the next level, then the next level, then the next level. So you're never failing. You're just always moving forward. That's what it is. And that's definitely seems to be your philosophy on life and your philosophy on learning and progress. So I love that you are brave enough to be vulnerable and say, I made mistakes and I'm glad and I learned. Can you share with us some of those mistakes that you made in that first wedding? You said you made all the mistakes. Like, what and why? You know, what did you learn from it? How has it helped you grow as a photographer?
I mean, so many things, some general, some very specific. Do you want me to speak on more the general, or maybe some of the specific stories of things that I learned? I
suppose what you feel would be most helpful for somebody who is starting out or is facing having made mistakes at a wedding, to just go, actually, do you know, it's okay. I'm just learning.
Okay, so I would say, you know, along with the story that I just shared, if there's a new photographer who is wanting to learn, like, to absolutely, and I did try, but maybe I could have tried harder to work under someone. You know, I'm very grateful that I didn't make any major mistake, like so major that maybe I lost their photos, or, missed a monumental moment or something like that. But that definitely can happen. And working under someone, you learn things like make sure your camera, if you're shooting digitally, for instance, has 2 card slots. That was something that happened to me along the way, that I photographed a wedding and I only had 1 card slot. And so all the photos from the very first moment that I showed up until the moment she walked down the aisle. So family photos, couples portraits. I think they did a first look. All of those photos I couldn't open.
Oh no!
On my computer.
Oh, that's a sinking feeling, isn't it? Oh.
I know. It was horrible, and I'm crying and I'm freaking out and I'm putting it in, and then finally it kept saying it was corrupt, and then it pulled it up. So, thankfully that was okay. But had I worked under someone, I would have known that. I think even just understanding the importance of a timeline, having a schedule. There was no schedule for that first wedding that I photographed. I didn't know what was happening. I don't even know if we had talked before the wedding. I think I just showed up. And, I missed the grandmother walking down the aisle. I didn't know where the wedding was going to be taking place on the grounds. So I think having a timeline, that's super important. I always send a questionnaire to my clients about 4 to 6 weeks in advance of the wedding. And then we actually spend about an hour on the phone or in person making their timeline if they don't have a wedding planner or something like that. So I think a timeline is also really huge for a new photographer. Maybe they're stepping into their first year and they're shooting weddings, but not understanding the control and the help that you can have by meeting with them, in advance. Yeah. So I think a timeline would be another one. And I actually wore heels.
Oh, clippy ones. Flip-floppy ones.
Like high heels to the wedding.
Oh, just the pain of it.
Yeah, don't do that.
I literally go to shoe shops and I put them on the floor and I go clip, 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 just to see, like, are they silent or do they make a noise? It's like my main criteria for a pair of shoes. Are they silent? And then are they comfortable?
Yes. No, that's a really good one, Sarah Jane, because that's something that you might not realize until you're shooting, like how loud it sounds.
And then
when
the ceremony's quiet and you need to get from the front to the back on a clip-cloppy 4 and you're suddenly like, I wish I didn't have these shoes on. So you were wearing heels for how many hours?
Oh yeah. I know this is very not professional, but thankfully I knew them well, because by the time the reception rolled around, I was like, the next wedding, I'm going to find a comfortable pair of shoes. And I think that's probably, ironically enough, one of the most commonly asked questions people will ask me is like, how do you find comfortable attire and things to wear for the wedding day? And I can share that as well. Like for my feet, I always use, it's called Vionic, the brand. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, Sarah Jane, but the brand Vionic, they create these inserts, and I used to buy their shoes, but their shoes are like so-so. And so, but now I buy the inserts and I put them in whatever pair of shoes. Like right now I'm wearing little booties and they're so comfortable. I mean, it changed everything for me. And I think being comfortable is really important. I even just switched from my hold fast. Do you wear a hold fast?
Well, funny story. I do now. And it's because I was in Paris doing a photo shoot and the couple were there and Matt was there, but he wasn't officially photographing. He was just there doing some behind the scenes stuff. And I used to have one camera over the shoulder and the other one across my body. And we were literally talking about the fact that Matt had hold fasts. And I was saying, I don't need hold fasts. It's fine.
You swagger?
No, I know. Sorry, my brother, my husband. Sorry, my husband. Yeah, my brother is Matt as well. That's why it's confusing. There's 2 Matts in my family, my brother and my husband. So no, my husband Matt, he had hold fast, and I was just carrying the both on one shoulder. So I was going, I don't need a hold fast. It's fine. At that moment, the camera slid off my shoulder, crashed onto the floor, and the aperture froze. Now, that wouldn't be a problem because I normally shoot 1.4 for everything. So ordinarily, if the aperture froze, it wouldn't really be a problem. I would just carry on shooting. But the aperture was still on the nighttime shots that I'd done for the last wedding when I've got the flash on. And I then have the aperture really wide because I get all the moving lines and stuff. And so it froze on like 8 or something like that. You know, like, and I was like, fortunately, Matt had his camera with him so I could use his camera. But yeah, as of that day, I now wear hold fasts for everything.
Yes.
That was one of my mistakes.
Yeah, I was about to say, I mean, there's so many things that happen, like little stories like that, but they really do result in a better solution. Like now you have your cameras on you at all times and you can clip them on and make sure they're secure. So,
and also make sure, for some reason mine, because I it happened to me, but I was sitting down, the camera fell off the holdfast. But because I was sitting down, it didn't have far to go. And so what I realized was that the little turny twisty thingy on it, that's the technical term, that had just been slowly undoing itself. I don't know how or when, but it had, and then eventually plopped off. So then again, it's just something I'm now aware that that's a potential problem. And so I always just like check it and tighten it at the start of a wedding day. Never had that problem again. So like you said, I actually feel like I get more nervous for a wedding now than I did before, because I know more what could go wrong.
Yes.
And I didn't realize before how many things can go wrong, especially with the camera, where it's suddenly doing something weird and you're like, I clearly pressed a button, but I don't know which button I pressed. And now it doesn't want to play ball anymore. And, you know, now I'm aware of all those things. It gives me more things to check, I think.
Yeah.
And that, you know, so it is helpful when things go wrong, because you know, oh, okay, I need a solution for that. I did not know that.
No, and honestly too, Sarah Jane, I was going to tell you that on the camera strap, I don't know if you knew this, but there's a little black, do you have a black strap on yours? A little safety?
Interesting. I can't picture it at the moment.
Yeah.
Probably.
So this is really interesting. I discovered at some point, because the same thing happened to me, the little twisty turny thing.
Twisty thing. Yeah, that's how it's called.
came undone. And I discovered that on some of them, maybe all of them now, because I got mine so long ago, there's a little black nylon strap, and you can actually clip it, and it's a backup, so that if your little twisty turny thing comes undone, that it will have like a secondary catch. And actually it has saved us so many times, because the movement of the camera and the movement of your body, it undoes it. So check for that. And if not, reach out to them and they will send you some.
That is a really good tip. Yeah. I will do that. Yeah, definitely.
Yes. But you know, we all make so many mistakes. And I think, you know, I grew up in a very perfectionistic family, and you know, really always had parents that pushed me to strive for perfection in everything. Like, you know, everything from school to sports or activities. And, you know, at some point you reach this point where you're like, oh my gosh, all I do is work, and I'm trying to just, you know, achieve this perfectionistic way. And I still have a lot of that in me. I mean, it's how I was brought up. But if you really think about life and how you've moved forward through anything, it's really through messing up.
It's so
you
true.
Know?
Yeah.
And if you don't mess up, then you don't move forward. And a lot of times people who are perfectionists, as much as they can achieve things, could be fear-based. Like, I'm not going to put this out there until it is perfect. And so a lot of things don't get done because you don't always have time to do everything perfectly, you know?
Yeah.
And so when I started thinking about the podcast and what I could help people with, I was like, well, what's my biggest struggle? Well, it's being able to overcome and embrace imperfection and just move through the fear of what is holding me back. And I struggle with it every day, but I feel like I'm getting better and better the more I just accept that, like, you have to go through the process.
Wow. Yeah. Because when you've been almost trained to think like that growing up, that's very hard to break out of. Any foundation that you make as a child is very difficult. So that, and most people, you know, the reality is most people never engage with, why do I do the things that I do, you know? And that shows incredible strength, you know, for you, that you're actually going, I do this and I do it because of this, and I think I can change, you know. And that's most people never embrace that part of their journey, and that's really incredible. And the fact that you're then sharing that journey with other people is just so generous and so amazing. So because I think, you know, everybody struggles with the same thing. I totally identify with that feeling. I was very fearful of making mistakes growing up, because they would have consequences that I couldn't foresee. And so that made me very fearful of making any kind of mistake. And so, similar to you, actually, just learning that it's okay to make mistakes. It's kind of what makes life fun, and that's how you learn. And it gives you a funny story, like my camera crashing to the floor. It wasn't great at the time, but now I have a funny story.
It's never great in the moment.
Yeah. And I just think, well, what is life if it's not funny stories? Like you're collecting funny stories. Nobody wants to hear about somebody boring that everything went perfectly well for them. That's not the story people want to hear. They want to.
It's true. It's like, it's like, you think about like the Rocky story, like, people who overcome great things. And, I feel like when you're raised in a mindset and in an environment where like there is no Rocky story, right? Like I don't, from a general view, you were very protected and very sheltered and everything, is, and so like anything in life, there's good and bad. And I'm so grateful for that. But, at some point I think I hit rock bottom and realized like I was really unhappy. And, I think that from a business point of view, I was scared to share because I didn't want my clients to think less of me. I didn't want the industry to think less of me, that I wasn't perfect or that I do make mistakes, or even just to talk about things like that you can have bouts of unhappiness in your life. But after working through counseling and reading and learning more about myself, I realized that everyone experiences bouts of unhappiness. And I think I owed it to myself and others to help them hopefully come out of their learning and take things from the podcast and just even conversations with people that, can help bring joy to them. And a lot of that is just accepting that like perfection isn't a must.
No.
And content. I used to think the word content was horrible. Like,
interesting.
Like, oh, content. That's a bad thing.
Because it's not pushing forward.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I thought contentment. Oh, I don't ever want to be content.
Was it almost like paired with laziness?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
In my mind, content was not okay for whatever reason. You can never be content. You can never rest. You can never whatever. And Brad, my husband, he really has helped me a lot. Just being around him, I'm observing, wow, we just looked at that situation two totally different ways.
Yes.
And I saw it one way and you saw it another.
Yeah.
And just to understand that contentment isn't a bad thing. We're always naturally striving to be better, but to be able to see the joy and the gratitude in what's around you is a good thing. And so that's what I'm working toward. Yeah.
That's amazing. I actually think that my husband, Matt, has helped me to learn to enjoy the journey. So maybe that's our biggest tip from today's podcast. Marry somebody who helps you enjoy the journey.
Absolutely.
It's so interesting. And I think, like you said, I think everybody is fearful to be their vulnerable self and to admit that they're on a journey and they're not there yet. And like I said, I think most people never really engage with everybody's on a process of healing, I think, because the moment you're born, you're just infected with wounds because everybody's imperfect. And, like I said, I was talking to my friend who's a single mum, and she said, I'm just so afraid that I'm an incompetent parent. And I said, every parent is incompetent. And I think the world would be a better place if every parent admitted they don't know how to parent. And so everybody grows up with issues. Because she said, I'm really worried I'm messing up my child. And I said, every parent is messing up their child. Every child is ending up on a therapist couch when they're older. That's just the way it goes. So you do your best and just, trust them to sort out the rest when they get old enough to deal with it. And like most people never really engage with that journey of self-healing and it is self-perfection, but not as, not like a striving, but just I am who I am, and I have what I have right now, and I'm going to enjoy it. And that's actually quite freeing, very freeing.
It really is. And I've noticed it start to translate into ways that it never would have before. Right now we're homebound, obviously.
Yes. For those of you, like, because we may be, well, by the time we put this podcast out, you might be like, why are you homebound? This was recorded during the COVID-19 when everybody's on lockdown. The entire world is stuck in their houses.
Right. And so, our weddings have all been rescheduled or canceled. And my husband, he's a designer, so a lot of his projects have been put on hold. And we're like, okay, what can we do that's not going to cost a lot of money, but, make good use of our time? And we've been working on our backyard.
Interesting. I think everybody's doing it. Everybody's houses are going to be immaculate at the end of this.
I know. It's true. It's true. But little things that I've noticed about myself, if something's off, I would used to get so much anxiety about it, and even with my photography, like if something wasn't perfect, I would just beat myself up over it. Like, why did I do that? This wasn't right. I should have moved this in the background, or I should have posed them this way. Like, but now I'm like, okay, I messed up and it's not great, but the next time I'll do better. Or if it's something that I can't change, then I just try to change my perspective about it. And I hope that whoever is listening to this can find some inspiration in that, because we are all trying to get better. And it's not that I'm saying don't get better, because I think that's a natural instinct, but also not to like beat yourself up over when you mess up or get mad or have anxiety over something that's not right the first time. You just observe it and say like, okay, it is what it is. I can't change it. Yeah. And like, next time we'll do it different. And I've been saying that, like, in the future, or next time we do this, or even if it's something with our backyard, like, you know what, next time the furniture might all be painted. Okay. It's all painted. I'm like, next time we paint the furniture, we'll do it a different color.
Yes. Yeah. Amazing. I heard this really fascinating quote by a blogger called Emily Nagoski. And she's written books as well. And she said, confidence is knowing what is, and joy is loving what is. And I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Just this idea of, you're confident because you're like, that's what it is. It is that, and it is what it is. And joy is actually loving what is. And you're like, that's what it is. And that's okay. And it's such a freeing and fascinating concept to just love what is, what currently is. And like you said, always striving forward, because we are built to learn and to grow and to create. And that's our makeup. That's a part in our DNA, but to also love what is at the same time, and love where you are on your journey. And that's, it's one of the most difficult things I think to do, because we're all our own worst critics as creatives, and we can be very hard on ourselves in our strive for perfection.
And like it really helps your mindset too, even for photography. Like we talked about the specifics of maybe the image isn't perfect, or maybe you messed up, but it also has really helped me embrace the imperfections of the day, or the imperfections of like a session. Maybe I planned and prepped and got ready for this location, and then when I get there, it's torrential downpour. And that happens. That is real. Like, we have no control over these things. And in that situation, you really have to get your mind in a place as a business owner and photographer to say like, okay, this isn't what I wanted, but it is what it is. So like, how can I take this situation and make it awesome for what it is? And I think that can really help a photographer, like in their mindset, just to be creative about something that's not what you originally planned for, which, I mean, Sarah Jane, like,
I sometimes find that some of my best pictures were pictures that just happened. And then I've tried to recreate them in the future, and it's not the same. And I just realized, like, it was at the time, it was an accident. I remember distinctly, it was in my first year of photography, and I took a picture of the bride, and she happened to put her head down, and the camera focused on her hair instead of her face. And at the time I thought, oh no, it's out of focus, but actually I've grown to love that soft focus, to actually focus slightly foreground, and then to have a softness on the face of your subject. And it was an accident. At the time, I thought it was imperfect, as you say, but actually it turned out that became an inspiration for me and changed the way that I see things and the way that I photograph. So it was a happy accident.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that that's what it allows for. Like, it gives yourself the space to make those mistakes, which actually turned out to be a really awesome image for you, and now something that you can try to recreate in the future, or even just enjoy that for what it is.
Yeah, so true, so true. So now you mentioned right back at the start that actually your architecture background, or photographing architecture and being married to an architect, which is bound to rub off on you, that has helped you in your pursuit of posing with couples, because it's part of the creative design process to keep analyzing what you're creating and going, no, it's not yet. That's not it yet. That's not it yet. And so that has given you confidence to pursue a pose with a couple that is just right, without panicking, thinking, oh, like I've moved them too many times, like they're gonna, like you. So talk me through your journey with that, learning how to pose couples, and
Okay, I'm really excited to talk about this, Sarah Jane, because like we talked about, I'm homebound right now and we're not doing a lot of shooting. And so I've been working really, really hard on putting together all of the knowledge and information that I have on posing into something that I can essentially help other photographers with, an online course. And so I've been thinking a lot back to like, well, how did I learn to pose? And like I said earlier, I never had the ability to work under another photographer. And this was 10, 11 years ago. I couldn't just like hop on Instagram and see all the images of poses that other awesome photographers are creating. So to answer your question, how did I learn about posing? Ironically enough, a lot of it was through trial and error, going back to that idea of making mistakes. And, I would put someone in a pose, which some of the poses, Sarah Jane, they were just crazy. Okay. But put them in a pose and just evolve it, like tweak it until it looked in a way that was natural. And over the years, I started to have a better understanding of my personal catalog of poses. And so, and it really was like evolving through a position that I'm watching unfold, and then understanding like, okay, yes, that looks better. Or when I get home and I'm comparing the images side by side, noticing like, okay, if the leg that's furthest away from the camera is bent, that her hip is going to look bigger on the camera. But if I have her bend her leg closest to the camera, it's going to appear more slender and flattering for the subject. And so I would literally just do side by sides, trying different things in person. And then when I get home, looking at them side by side on the computer, and then observing what was working. And over the years, I started to, I think, mentally have a base collection of poses that I feel really good about, that are like my go-to. And so I have those base poses that I make sure that I get, whether I have 5 minutes or 2 hours. And depending on how much time I have, that's just how much space I have in between the base poses and what I'm filling it in with.
Interesting.
So that's kind of how my posing approach has worked. And I think, as photographers, we're always trying new things as creatives. And I really truly believe that in 10 years from now, my collection of poses will have even changed more.
Wow.
But for now, I think that I have a kind of mental catalog of poses that I go through, and I try to always have them like flowing into one another. So I don't want my client like sitting and then standing and then, maybe sitting again. Like I try to have the different poses flow together. So it doesn't feel sense. It feels more effortless to them.
Yes.
But a lot of it was just trial and error and evolving the pose. And then whenever I was getting home, comparing different scenarios, like, okay, if her hand is here or here, which looks better? Well, then the next time, I don't have to think about the hand anymore. I don't have to think about the leg bend. Maybe now I'm focusing on what direction are their shoulders in.
Yes.
Until you get it to a point where you're like, okay, this is the pose. It's really refined. It looks really good. I know how to get them into those prompts, and then try and find another pose that I can create, essentially.
So it actually frees you up to be more creative, because you can work much quicker now because you know what you're looking for and how to get there. And then you've got spare time. So you're like, oh, let's try and make something new.
Absolutely. And we've all been there where the groom doesn't maybe want to
take
some photos.
Yeah, been there, done that.
Your bride really, really, really wants pictures, and she paid for this photography service, so we really have to come together as a team here.
Yeah.
But at the same time, in it with a groom like that or a situation like that, they don't want to take photos for 2 hours. They want to take photos in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And so you have to be able to like go through those poses really quickly and in a way where you're telling them exactly what to do. They're not thinking about it, and then they're like, "Oh, that wasn't so hard as I thought it would be."
Now that is an interesting question, because that is a common problem, to have either a couple or maybe just the groom who is stiff. How do you handle it when you've got a couple who you're trying to put them into your pose and it just looks awkward because they're being very stiff? Like, do you have like go-to techniques or to get you through that, or do you just think, oh well, it is what it is?
Yeah. No, I don't ever think it is what it is, because I think with posing in particular, when you have the knowledge and the experience, you can get them to get into the pose.
Yeah.
But I really believe posing is like maybe 50% technique, and then it's 50% mentality.
Interesting. Describe what you mean by that.
Well, maybe he's nervous, or maybe he's insecure, or she. I don't want to say just the groom. Maybe one of them is insecure. Maybe they're nervous. Maybe they're cold or hot, or they haven't eaten anything.
Interesting.
And so I think it's being very specific with the posing and knowing what you want them to do to be able to prompt them, but it's also dealing with the mental side of it. Like, does he need flattery?
Interesting.
Like, oh wow, that looks amazing. Or is he irritable? Maybe they are thirsty. Like, do we need to go do a pit stop and get some water?
Yeah.
Or maybe they're the type of people or person that wants to feel in control, doesn't like to be told what to do. And so sometimes I'll say things like, well, I'm kind of thinking about shooting either here, like maybe on the bridge or under the trees. Like, Brad, what do you think? And just involving them. And I feel like that 50% of posing, the part that has to do with personality, is really important, because sometimes they're stiff because they're feeling some type of way. And it's our jobs to figure out like how to get in the psyche of them and say, like, why are they feeling that way? And how can I make them feel more comfortable so that they can take and receive the instructions that I'm giving them and create natural looking poses.
Gosh, it's so, people's skills are so key when you're photographing weddings, because it's not as simple as architecture when, the thing is just there. Like you said, you've got to try and, work with it and encourage it, and, and what you put in, you get out, in front of it. It's a fascinating process. I really enjoy, all the different personalities that I meet. And I personally find it, if the bride is the one who's nervous but the groom is fine, it's a better combination. I find that the groom is able to help the bride relax a lot more than the bride is able to help the groom. That's been my personal experience. So if it's going to be one, I prefer the bride to be nervous than the groom.
I would agree. And I think too, the bride is typically, not always, but typically more excited for the photos than the groom. But just like the groom helps the bride, it is good to sometimes remind the groom, like, hey, you're doing this for your bride. Like,
so true.
So that you guys can have these images and because she wants them. And that sometimes will help them. Even though, when the bride is more nervous and the groom is not, he calms her.
Yeah.
A lot of times. But we've all been there. We've all been in there. And the people skills, it really is. Don't you think, Sarah Jane, half the battle?
Oh, yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. And I think, I am naturally a people person, and I do often wonder, gosh, I think it's a hard job. If you're not naturally a people person, you can learn it, but it is tricky. And I think it just comes with practice. And I advise people to get as much practice with as many people as possible outside of weddings. So start talking to the cashier at the supermarket and say, hi, how are you doing? How's your day? Just learning how to initiate conversation, learning how to keep conversation going, and how to connect with people that you only just met, who you have no other connection with, and the more you do that, the more natural it becomes, and the more able you are to do that.
Yes, it's true. It really is true. And it's truly trial and error. And sometimes I have done things that are awkward, not just with posing and tangible things, but the people side, like, you observe just like you're observing the images. It's that other skill set that you have to work on. And I'll notice that, or one thing I notice that I still struggle with sometimes is whenever I get nervous, I want to fill the space with words.
Interesting.
Like, I just want to, talk to them, but just about anything. And sometimes I'll say something before thinking.
Yeah.
And I've definitely said things that at a session, I'm like, why did I say that?
Yeah, I do that all the time.
It's not like a recording that you can edit. It's like, no, this is not, I can't take that back.
Yeah, I normally at that point, I just go, oh, I don't know why I said that. And then that makes them laugh and I get a good laughing picture. So, it's like one of my favorite comedians is Eddie Izzard. And if he ever says a joke that doesn't go down well, he just goes, note to self, never use that joke again. And then it gets him a laugh, so he's won, even when he loses, he wins. So that's what I do. I always just go, oh, that was awkward, I don't know why I said that. And then people laugh and I get a good picture, so I still win.
Yeah. And you have to test it out, right? Because sometimes you try to say something to the couple, like, I was telling Brad, because I'm working on the course, the posing course. I was telling Brad the other day that one of the things I say to the groom, like if I want them to lower their arm, but I want to laugh, I'll say like, okay, Brad, lower your arms a little bit. And I'll say, oh, not that low, but it sounds cheesy. It sounds cheesy for me to say it, right? And Brad was like, oh, that's cheesy. But in person, it makes them laugh.
So
and I think,
true.
And so I think it's just like learning those little nuances, or maybe I say not that low and they're like, oh, that was cheesy. Well, then you never use that again. But it really makes them laugh. And so you kind of can start to learn those things that will help you move through the session. And then those things that you don't say and you say, okay, note to self, never say that again.
Or like you said, it's difficult because sometimes it works with one couple and doesn't work with another couple. And then you use the same line on another couple and it works magic and you get this brilliant picture. But actually when we got married, I wasn't doing wedding photography. Matt had just started, but I hadn't. And our wedding photographer did the same with us. He was very hands-off, very natural photographer. But he did the same joke with, he said, okay, come together for a little kiss. I said a little kiss, guys, like this. And that was it. We were just exploding with laughter. And I think that's a really good tip, to get people laugh. Yeah, not that much. Because people are nervous anyway. And when you kind of make a joke like that, it brings down their reservations, because they're already like, oh, they're all tightly bound and worried about making a mistake. And if you make light, make a joke, they're just like, oh, okay. It's almost like the thing I feared has happened, so now I'm just going to relax and I'm just going to enjoy myself. It kind of breaks the ice, with the fear of like, oh, I'm going to do something wrong, I'm going to put my arm in the wrong place, and just gets that out of the way. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. Even if we're just going to laugh about it, like, it's no problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think too, when it comes to posing, I think they are, like you said, they're scared, they're afraid of not looking good. Like, how many times have we heard, are you going to make me look good? Or, or are you going to, or like, what do we need to do to make these better? They want to do anything that they can to have their photos be awesome. And so I know every photographer has a different approach, but what I've learned that works well for me, because when I first started, I would say, hey guys, just go over there and act natural.
Yeah.
And like, they don't know what do you do when someone tells you to act natural and you're being photographed? Well, you're going to be awkward because you're being photographed and you don't know what to do. And so I think that what I've learned is that the more specific you can be, actually, the more natural the images become, which is almost counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But it really has worked for me, that when I'm being very specific with them, all the way down to like, their fingertips, right?
Yeah.
That they look natural because I'm making sure as I'm seeing them that even if they are nervous, that it's not translating like through the way that they're holding their hand or their head or their shoulders or feet, kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so true. Yeah. It's so helpful to talk with you about this. And I'm so grateful for your generosity just to share your story. Now, who have we got joining us on the podcast here? I've got little ears on my screen.
So this is Chaos.
Oh, Chaos. What breed of dog is he?
He's a Chihuahua.
And wow. So for those of you listening on Spotify, you really need to get across to YouTube now and have a look at this video because Chaos is adorable. And he's been with you most of the podcast. I just keep seeing these little ears just appearing.
Yeah, if I don't hold him, it's like hit or miss if he'll bark.
Right.
Or if he'll want attention. And so if I'm holding him, he's pretty content. He's about 13.
So cute.
Thank you. Yeah, he's a good little guy, and he's been with me a long time. 13 years.
I am a big fur baby person, so I love that he joined the Chaos, our guest star on our podcast today. So Catherine,
have to title it Catherine and Chaos.
Yeah, Catherine and Chaos. There we go. So thank you so much for joining us, Catherine. So you've got your posing course coming out in the summer. It may even be out by the time this podcast goes live. We'll post a link with this podcast. But for those of people listening on Spotify and whatever, can you tell people where they can go to get more information about your business training and your podcast, Mistakes Make Magic, and your posing course?
Yeah, of course. So if they're interested in the posing course, it's theposingplan.com. The podcast is Mistakes Make Magic. And anything Catherine Guidry you can find at the website or on Instagram. And my name is a little hard. People have an issue with it, but it's Guidry. So it's a little different, but it's a Cajun French name.
Is it? Fascinating. That is so interesting. Well, Catherine, thank you so much for everything that you've shared. And I just love that the fact that you're brave to be vulnerable means that other people will be brave and be vulnerable, and we can all actually just start enjoying the journey together. So thank you so much for everything you've shared, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah Jane. You are awesome, and I absolutely enjoyed chatting with you.
Oh, thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, you can find more interviews, tips and inspiration in the Love Light Fine Art community on Facebook. You can also follow along with each new episode on the Love Light YouTube, podcast and Instagram. And don't forget to visit www.sarahjaneethan.co.uk/lovelight for information on training, real-life wedding workshops and online courses to develop your own fine art photography and connect with more of the clients you love.